The neighborhood women started calling him Naomi's baby boy. But his real name was Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. A wonderful story that in its entirety took about 12 minutes to read, but it is the whole message that I want to glean truths from this morning to honor mothers and to apply to our lives. My subject in the story is about faithfulness, it's about kindness, it's about integrity, it's also about God's protection and God's blessing. This is not a story about right and wrong, but rather love for family, the harsh realities of life, and being faithful to those we love who are in the midst of difficulty. All as a context to the man who had become king of Israel, David, as the great-grandson of Ruth. As you know, for the last 4 Sundays before today, we've been talking about David from the time he was a teenager, how he went and killed Goliath, and then his life was sought by Saul, and then David and Jonathan became friends. Jonathan's life with David and David's promotion to eventually become the king of Israel was all in mind as God was looking at a helpless widow who had lost her husband and lost her 2 sons, and all she had left was 2 Moabite women as daughters-in-law who didn't even have the bloodline of her nation, and she was feeling lost, of course. Ruth to Naomi showed kindness and faithfulness and integrity. Ruth left her family and her home to be with and care for Naomi. I would imagine that this would have been an incredible challenge, and we don't know exactly how long the son had been married to Ruth, but obviously a meaningful relationship had been forged between Naomi and Ruth. And so Ruth loved Naomi, and the idea of watching Naomi walk out of her sight into the distance, heading through the wilderness back to Jerusalem, while Ruth turned around and went back to her family, was just an impossible situation for Ruth. I'm sure that God allowed their bond, and just the natural forming of the bond between Ruth and Naomi was so powerful and so strong that there was no way that Ruth was going to allow Naomi to walk out of her life. Ruth then demonstrated faithfulness and kindness and integrity also by following Naomi to their new home. We also observe the faithfulness and the kindness and the integrity that Boaz expressed to Ruth. Boaz provided a home, inheritance, and a family to Ruth and Naomi without having any obligation to do so. While this story is not about possessions and getting rich necessarily, it is about caring for those who have suffered loss. And do we not have people in our lives constantly who are suffering loss? We have people around us. And it's very important as we look at this story today that we look at the lives of 3 people who made decisions when they didn't know what the ramifications of those decisions were going to be. Naomi had no clue that Ruth would follow her back. She just was a broken woman who was alone in life, and she just thought she was going to go back to Israel, to Bethlehem, and she didn't know, or Jerusalem, and she didn't know exactly what was going to happen to her when she got back there. And certainly Ruth, leading her mother and father and leading all that was familiar and the homeland that she was raised and born in, she had no clue as to what she would be coming to, leaving her home and following Naomi to a place that she had never been. Even Boaz had no clear idea of where his life was going to be led. He was just considering with kindness and faithfulness that this woman needed help, and he reached out to her. It is only we today who have the full story, and we can look a couple of generations ahead to see that such character and such integrity of 3 people who were just making sure in a loving way that people were cared for and their needs were met, that they would become the ancestry that would bring the greatest king in Israel to bear. And not only that, but Jesus, who was called the Son of David because he was from the line of David, and David was one of his ancestors ahead of him. The Messiah, Jesus himself, came through the line of David and through the line of a foreign woman, Ruth. It's not about possessions. The story is about caring for people who suffered loss and doing so out of a genuine care for the person without concern of personal cost.